Which of the following is the main purpose of establishing boundaries with a client? A. Rapport. B. Convenience. C. Status considerations. D. Safety. D. Safety. It is necessary to establish boundaries with all clients, though the process may vary on client and circumstance. The most important reason for having boundaries is the overall safety of the interaction. If boundaries are well established at the beginning of treatment, the treatment can then deal with what is within those boundaries rather than continuing to deal with boundary issues. A lack of boundaries might lead to a situation that is emotionally or professionally unsafe for either the client or the social worker. Rapport is important, but will be established through a longer interaction than boundary setting. Convenience and considerations of status are not as important as safety. Which of the following is the most frequently identified form of unethical behavior that is reported by social workers? A. A conflict of interest. B. A confidentiality breach. C. Not having a client's consent. D. A dual relationship. B. A confidentiality breach. A confidentiality breach is when a social worker gives information to a third party without the client's explicit permission. Social workers report confidentiality breaches more than any other issue. Social workers do not report dual relationships, conflict of interest, or not having a client's consent more than anything else. A former client you saw for several years has contacted you to request copies of his records. You feel strongly that by allowing your client to read his records, you would be causing him serious harm. What should you do? A. Give the client copies despite your reservations. B. Document the client's request as well as the reason behind your denial, and refuse to let the client have the copies. C. Give copies to the client's closest family member, and explain to that person your reservations. D. Refuse to give the client copies, and do not explain why. B. Document the client's request as well as the reason behind your denial, and refuse to let the client have the copies. Section 1.08 of the NASW Code of Ethics, Access to Records, states that there are times when a client's access to his or her own records could cause harm. In these situations, social workers have the right to limit access to records, though clients' requests and the rationale for withholding some or all of the records should be documented in clients' files. Also, a brief explanation may be given to the client. You should not give copies to anyone other than the client, especially if you are afraid it could do harm to the client. In macro-social work, engaging with the power centers of community is essential. Which of the following types of power comes from superior ability or knowledge? A. Coercive power. B. Legitimate power. C. Reward power. D. Expert power. D. Expert power. One of the main focuses of macro-social work is community organizing, and critical to this type of practice is analyzing where power lies within communities. Knowing where the power centers in communities exist, one will have to engage with them to accomplish change. Coercive power comes from the threat of punishment. Reward power comes from the control of incentives. Expert power comes from control of knowledge or expertise. Referent power relies on having charisma, or a visible relationship with others who have power. Legitimate power arises from the appearance of legitimate authority. Informational power comes from the control of information. According to the DSM-V, how long must an individual experience difficulty falling asleep or maintaining sleep in order to meet criteria for insomnia disorder? A. 2 weeks. B. 1 year. C. 6 months. D. 3 months. D. 3 months. According to the DSM-V, insomnia disorder is marked by a complaint of dissatisfaction with sleep quantity or quality, including difficulty initiating or maintaining sleep. Symptoms must occur at least 3 nights a week for a minimum of 3 months in order for a diagnosis to be made. Insomnia symptoms may include difficulty falling asleep at night, waking up during the night, waking up too early, not feeling well rested after a night's sleep, daytime tiredness or sleepiness, irritability, depression or anxiety, difficulty paying attention, focusing on tasks or remembering, increased errors or accidents, ongoing worries about sleep. Which of the following is untrue about the nature of intimate partner abuse? A. It is based on mental illness. B. It occurs in all cultural groups. C. It can occur between any cohabitating couple. D. It can take the form of financial abuse. A. It is based on mental illness. Intimate partner abuse may involve people who have some sort of mental illness, but the central factor is not psychopathology, but a need for power and control over a partner. Intimate partner abuse can take nearly any form that involves coercion, including financial abuse. It can occur in almost any context in which 2 people live together, and it occurs in all known ethnic and cultural groups. Which of the following legal events would require a social worker to produce client records? A. A subpoena. B. A deposition. C. A cause of action. D. A court order. D. A court order. A social worker should only produce records when a valid court order has been presented. A subpoena is a demand to appear before the court. A deposition is the testimony one provides to the court. A cause of action is the reason why an action has been brought before the courts, such as negligence or malpractice. Which of the following is true regarding the practice of exchanging goods for social work services? A. It is not allowed in any situation. B. It is an accepted practice in most areas of the United States. C. It should only be used with extreme care. D. Though it was used in the past, it is not used anymore. C. It should only be used with extreme care. Section 1.13 of the NASW Code of Ethics, Payment for Services, states that social workers should avoid exchanging goods and services for professional services. However, in communities in which bartering is acceptable, it can be used. Social workers should take extreme care in these circumstances and give each situation careful thought. Bartering in exchange for services is not an accepted practice in most areas of the United States, only in some, usually rural communities. As stated above, it is allowed in some circumstances even in the present day. During an individual therapy session with a social worker, a client discloses to using heroin frequently for many years. What should the social worker do first? A. Advocate for inpatient care. B. Gather additional information from the client. C. Diagnose the client. D. Encourage more family support. B. Gather additional information from the client. Any form of substance misuse is a complex problem, and effective treatment depends on assessment and rapport building. More information will be needed because each patient's motivation, usage history, and preferred course of treatment are very unique. Without additional information, the client's diagnosis would be inaccurate. A complete assessment of the presenting issue will be conducted first, and if inpatient treatment is necessary, it will be recommended much later. Family support can be helpful, but understanding this client's pattern of use and its causes should come first. Which of the following is the correct pair of circumstances under which a social worker can break confidentiality? A. A request for legal purposes and answering a family's questions after the death of a client. B. A third-party payer's request for information and a request for legal purposes. C. The client is a danger to himself or others and a request for legal purposes. D. The client is a danger to himself or others and a third-party payer's request for information. C. The client is a danger to himself or others and a request for legal purposes. Social workers are required to break confidentiality when any client reveals they are a threat to themselves or others. The social worker must identify that the client has a plan and the means to carry out the harmful event. Social workers are also required to break confidentiality in a legal matter, such as a court case, but they should try to give the least amount of information possible, only what is requested. Social workers should also inform clients when they must break confidentiality.